We're here today with Marin, the Ontario Ombudsman, who's made some time to come and talk to us about some investigations he's done at London City Hall and some other issues that are under his watch. And with us here is Patrick Maloney, our City Hall reporter, and Jonathan Scher, our medical reporter. I'm Greg Van Morsel, the city editor. And so maybe, Mr. Marin, you throw it to you and
for sure
tell us what you'd like to tell.
Well, thanks for having us over. As you know, the main reason for me being to London this afternoon is to appear before a City Council to talk about open meetings in Ontario and particularly in London. The open meetings legislation, the core of the legislation, predates Confederation. It's not new. It's been around for a long time. And the basic principle hasn't evolved since then. And it is that council should meet openly unless it falls within some very restrictive exceptions in the Municipal Act. And this is to allow for city business to happen transparently and open to the public. The only major change in the legislation occurred in 2008 when the Ombudsman's office was made the de facto oversight of municipalities in Ontario unless they decide to opt out. Before 2008, the only recourse citizens had to challenge a municipality that met in camera without authorization was to bring judicial review. So which means that unless you had deep pockets and you were affected directly by the decision, basically municipalities remain unchallenged. Since 2008, the Ombudsman is an additional recourse. Citizens can still bring the City Council to court, but we're an additional recourse free of charge open to municipalities. There are in Ontario 444 municipalities, of which 190 fall under the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman, including the City of London.
The whatever 44 minus 190, I won't do the math, but those ones would have effectively hired their own sort of ombudsman.
That's correct. They can basically opt out and then set up whatever system they want to set up. So some people have gone to, there's an organization called LAS, which offers investigators. Some people have just hired competent investigators. Others have just hired buddies of the mayor and ex-city administrators. And of course, if you set up that system, you've got to pay for it. And there's no structure in place to investigate. I mean, often people are on contract for 12 months, 18 months, and so that's the option in Ontario. We have the de facto default ombudsman, overseer is the ombudsman, but you can opt out. Since 2008, we have had a lot of experience with municipalities. We're releasing next month the first ever annual report dealing just with open meetings in municipalities. We've published what we call the Sunshine Law Handbook as a guide to municipalities. What we found is that to a large extent there's a lot of teaching to be done, information sharing, training with municipalities who, to my amazement, in so many numbers do not understand their legal obligations, despite the fact it's so old. And the reason for that is because they've rarely been challenged, because it usually would cost you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring a municipality before the courts. So we come in and we start investigating one of these cases. It's like, who are you? What's this law about?
Right.
And there's the look of amazement that I've been elected to my job rather. And you're some public servant from Toronto coming in to tell us how to run our show.
But is it the politicians who don't understand these rules, or the administrators that work with them? Because generally the administrators would say, would they not? Well, this is what the Municipal Act says, or this is what the rules are.
It's a good point. Our experience has been that administrators are knowledgeable and they're helpful, including the city administrator here. Kathy Saunders, I believe is her name, pardon me? The clerk, yeah. City clerk, who's very helpful, but they don't always listen to their clerk.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we found that city solicitors run interference because they feel that their fiefdom is threatened, and already there's a defensive posturing often by city councillors, and it works very well with lawyers who create additional suspicion. So we don't find that city clerks are the problem. In fact, in many cases, they know the law, as you mentioned, and they're quite helpful in steering their city council.
Were city lawyers helpful in the 2 investigations into London, or were they more of a obstacle to those investigations?
Well, I wouldn't call them helpful. An obstacle, I wouldn't go that far, but I think it was unfortunate to see that there was all these legal barriers suddenly to our work. You know, we've been in business for 37 years. When we launch an investigation of the provincial government, we don't deal with lawyers. We don't deal with lawyers. I mean, if I go to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, if I go to the Ministry of Labour, any other government agency, boards, tribunals, crown corporations, the OLG, we don't deal with lawyers because there's a certain culture within the provincial government that accepts our role. We have direct access to witnesses. We don't have information channeled through lawyers, points of contact or whatever. And in the case of the Harmony Grand Buffet case, suddenly there was this issue of councillors getting indemnified, each one to hire their own lawyers, and then we refused to go through lawyers. In the end, we didn't have to deal with lawyers, but that delayed the investigation. And then it created this kind of adversarial climate. The reason why we don't deal with lawyers is pretty simple. There's no right to a lawyer to begin with. People say, oh, I have a right to a lawyer. No, a right to a lawyer is a very specific kind of right. City councillors are not detained, they're not arrested, they're not in jeopardy of fines or imprisonment, their liberty is not at stake. There's no penalty, so there's no right to a lawyer, first of all. Secondly, as ombudsman, if we have to get our information through lawyers and layers of bureaucracy and other points of contact, then it affects the evidence we're getting. We're not getting the straight goods, we're getting the filtered goods. And to try to make that point and get it understood was made very complicated by the adversarial stance of both the city solicitor and then several councillors who bandy terms around like this is police states and what happened to democracy, and you know, I know yesterday I was being called a socialist, so one day I'm a socialist, the next I'm a fascist. You know, it's just it was on social media. I forget who.
Oh, just some person.
Yeah. But you know, it just inflames the debate, and the debate becomes hard to pin down. So.
And is it especially difficult in a situation like Harmony, where you're having to deal with the accounts of 6 different individuals, and you're getting filtered
Absolutely.
answers? There's going to be some disagreement about what's said, that type of investigation.
Absolutely. That's one of the recommendations we made in the case. An informal recommendation at the end of the report was that, you know, when they're gathering together, a number of councillors, tape the interview. Tape it. You know, we don't need lawyers. We'll just grab the tape.
Get an iPhone when you go to lunch?
Yeah, why not? iPhone, just tape it. I mean, we're in 2012. This idea of like cryptic minutes or no minutes just doesn't cut it anymore. And you know, it makes our job a lot harder. It means, you know, they immediately everybody wanted lawyers. It became a very adversarial. You know, our definition of meetings is pretty simple. We use a definition in the legislation, which is not very helpful, because in the legislation, a meeting is defined as you know, council coming together. So it doesn't really define it. We understand that in 2012, council needs an opportunity to socialize, network. Of course they do, and we've never been against that. In fact, if it wasn't for social events and networking, they wouldn't know each other. So how could they run the city? So we have no issue with that. The issue we have, though, is that when we launch investigation, we should get full cooperation. There's no reason why this case could not have been wrapped up within hours of us getting involved, not days and weeks and months and all the charades that we were put through.
Can I take you back just one step? This is a comment that you'd made, I'm trying to there's a lot of teaching to be done with municipalities who, to my amazement, do not understand their legal obligations. That reference to legal obligations, you mean their obligation to hold public and open meetings?
That's correct.
Exactly what you're
That's correct.
Anything else that's specific?
That's correct. No, we found instances in Ontario, and this will be in our annual report next month, we found instances in Ontario where municipal council votes themselves a salary increase in private. Yes. And then later on somebody does the paperwork to confirm it. We found municipal government doing an entire set of deliberations on public policy issues and then meeting in a group simply to rubber stamp it publicly where none of the deliberations are made public.
Does it surprise you, going back to your reaction about everybody in London wanting to lawyer up, does it surprise you that you would run into that in a city like this? I mean, this is the 11th largest city in the country. It's not Duckburg, Ontario, right? Does that? I mean, would you expect in a city like this that they would be quite a bit more knowledgeable about your role and their responsibility when you come knocking?
I think that, and I accepted when we had this new area of jurisdiction, that there would be a period of growing pains. And I accepted that. What surprised me is, apart from the growing pains about, well, who's this ombudsman, where does he come from, where's the statute, and so on, which I accepted, I thought the substantive part would be settled. Yeah. Because it hasn't changed since pre-Confederation. So that surprised me for sure. Yeah. But I think part of the challenge in dealing with municipal council is often they rotate every 4 years, right?
Sure.
Because when I deal with a bureaucracy, someone may be in the position, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, so there's a culture in the place. Whereas here, I think it'll take longer to crack. And, we have some very coercive tools available under the Ombudsman Act, such as the power to issue subpoenas. I mean, we don't have to come down and do interviews here in London. We just offer bus fare and a bus ticket and a subpoena. And if you don't show up, we get it endorsed as a court order, and you'll be in trouble if you don't show up. But we haven't done that yet.
Then you need a lawyer, though.
Given your...
Not necessarily, because all you're doing is appearing, unless they want to challenge the subpoena. But otherwise, you just appear and testify. But, we've been bending over backwards to be understanding and informative and to say, okay, we need to work together here.
What's a bad day for you?
Well, it's a bad day when it seems that we're tangling over things that are not worth the energy.
Like
some of the issues we've dealt with here in London, it was a real challenge in both these cases, especially the second one, to get City Council to focus on the issues. The issue wasn't, why can't I face my accuser? What's this undemocratic office? You're under investigation. If you believe what you did is justified in law, cooperate and let us clean it up. Yeah. But in the end, we concluded that there was nothing technically illegal about the meeting. So,
in both cases.
Yeah, in both cases. And why did it take so much teeth pulling to get there?
Yeah.
This is to that point. Maybe.
Yeah.
I can steer you back to provincial politics or municipal politics. I think we've all had experiences with bureaucrats at the provincial level. And the impression I've been given very clearly is that some of them are astonished when they deal with municipal governments. I would use the word arrogance. It's sort of this, well, I'm the councillor for Ward 15, perhaps you've heard of me, and oh, by the way, you're not going to tell me what to do. Would you use that word, that there's an arrogance, a surprising level of arrogance among municipal politicians who are, in fact, local guys, local members of the community, that when someone from Queen's Park or Toronto comes down to talk to them, that's there. That idea that you've never heard of me and don't tell me what to do.
I wouldn't use that word. Allow you to use it. I just think that in some cases we found them ill-informed and leading to unnecessary rabble-rousing.
Like saying I need a lawyer.
Yeah, no, but this police state stuff, and I mean, come on.
Where did was that an actual politician's term?
Yeah, it's in our report.
What community would that have been?
It's here. It's here.
It was in London?
Yes. I believe we have it in our report.
When is your little report coming out again? It's out now.
The one on annual reports?
Yeah.
On the open meetings, it's coming out next month. I don't have it here.
You're talking about it's in the London report.
Yeah, it's in the London report.
Speaking of, while you talk generally about some of the challenges in dealing with some of the municipal open door meetings, how do the two investigations in London rank in terms of the sort of hostility that you received from some members of council here? Is that level of hostility common in other municipalities, or was that something that was more than you've seen elsewhere?
Perhaps a little higher, a little more rancorous than others. You don't get the gold medal, though. There's another city that's we're wrestling with right now. But
Tell us.
I could guess.
Which,
Hamilton.
no,
No?
actually. But you know what? Let me tell you what's encouraging. I'll focus on the positive. We've had dealings with Fort Erie, Amherstburg, and even to a certain extent Hamilton. And these three jurisdictions were very hostile to us. And once we reached out to them, they reached out to us. And we've done enormous progress with these three municipalities. Amherstburg right now has really cleaned up their act. They're one of the best municipalities out there. Fort Erie, I remember when it was one of our first cases, and it progressed similar to this one, where I went and addressed council, and then they listened, and we reached out, and things are going well with Fort Erie. Fort Erie passed resolutions wanting to get us to take over the mush sector. So I'm hoping that here, that we're able to turn things around a little bit. So, you know, it's easy for people who never cross each other in the elevator to become under siege and to, not put a face to the other person, because they don't have to deal with me. I'm just somebody who's very conveniently, in Toronto on Bay Street, and it makes good local politics to kind of slag, some guy in a glass tower in downtown Toronto. So I'm hoping to be here and try to dispel some of that, to try to show them we don't bite. In both cases, we didn't find any technical breaches of the law.
There's another thing that's going on now. We see it with some frequency now, and this is, the empowered citizen activist who shows up at a council meeting, and they can often be councils that are just not even watched by the media. And I think there's one in this area that's on your dial right now, but they have their camera or they have their cell phone, and
yeah.
They start taping meetings, and from the perspective of the media, it's hard not to argue that we're all well served by that. How big a deal is that becoming? Like, what volume of complaints are you seeing about that? We've seen here an example where they actually called the cops on a woman while she was filming. She was really doing nothing untoward. In fact, I think that case might be in front of you. But are you hearing a lot of that? They just don't like the fact that they're being recorded.
Definitely. And, our position is simple. The exceptions within the Act should be used and interpreted restrictively.
Yeah.
It should be wide open.
Yeah.
In case of doubt, open up the doors. And so on. Someone's taping, someone's recording. As long as they're not interfering with the proceedings,
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
Does your office oversee the corrections ministry?
Yes, the ministry, yes.
Have you, let me ask you about this. In London, in Ottawa, and forgive me, but I can't remember the third place, but there were at least two, and possibly three large correctional institutes in this province that, for the better part of the summer, have been flashpoints all over the place.
Yes.
Overcrowding, deaths, allegations of beatings, usually inmate on inmate I'm talking about. In the one here, which is a large regional correctional center, Alden
Yes.
Middlesex Detention Center, I mean, deplorable stories that, it's not quite a Devil's Island kind of place, but it sounds like if you get sent there, or you're just doing time there waiting for your keys to come up, I mean, like, you're squished 4 or 5 guys into a cell meant for 2. Your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, 2 things. We're currently conducting a systemic investigation on the use of force by correctional officers and how it's documented or not documented, and what happens when there's a use of force in a jail, because there's supposed to be protocols that exist, and we've had numerous complaints by inmates that they've landed in hospital with broken bones and injuries, and there's no paper trail at all to document how that happened. So we are in the middle of a systemic investigation dealing with that issue.
What about the overcrowding?
The overcrowding, we've been having meetings every week, sometimes several times a week, with senior officials from the Ministry of Correctional Services, and learning from them what they're doing about it. And they seem to have initiatives underway, and we're monitoring that to see whether or not we can contribute anything more to it. But for now, we're keeping an eye and monitoring on them. We may have an investigation on it, or we may not, depending on what their next moves are.
Are you aware in particular of the file here at Alden
I am.
Detention Center? And you say you're monitoring it.
It's my briefing notes.
What is your not to prejudge it, but what is your early impression of what they're doing to correct this issue?
I'm still wrestling with it right now. I know I've had dozens and dozens of tweets from correctional officers asking me to read immediately, Facebook posts, most of them anonymous. I've urged them, if they have an issue, to complain using the normal channel. The confidentiality is assured. We will take their complaints seriously. We have one complaint from allegedly a correctional officer. That's all we have.
Who is scared for their own safety at work? Is that effectively?
I don't know what the issue is, but I've referred everyone who tweets me. I say, here's how to go about it, because as the Ombudsman, I get 18,500 complaints a year, and I can't go in on a wild goose chase. If someone has an issue they want us to look at, articulate it, we'll consider it, and we're not afraid to investigate the tough issues.
The other place that seems to be a flashpoint is the one in Ottawa.
Yes.
And there's a third one, is there not, that has been trouble all summer long? I can't recall it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've only had one person who's agreed to file a formal complaint of some sort.
That's correct. The one correctional officer.
One correctional officer.
From inmates, though, the complaints are up 50%.
And about how
Yes.
how many correctional officers have communicated with you in some capacity but haven't gone forward to complain?
I don't know. They're mostly they use my Twitter. So if you do a search on Twitter, but there are many that have, look into this. My life's in jeopardy. It's overcrowding, things like that. And we need particulars, and the Ombudsman Act extends to them as well. The full protections, so that there's no risk of reprisals. These are things we take very seriously, but we need to have it articulated. We need to have something to work with. Right. We don't just take anonymous tips and just.
Sure.
What about if we just go back to the inmates for a minute? What about the inmates? It's my perception that many people say, "Oh, you're an inmate. You kind of deserve what you get." But many of these people are there just they're just being detained, like pending a bail hearing or whatever.
Agreed.
If you're squished 4 or 5 into a cell that's meant for 2 people, is that any different than ignoring Aunt Betty in the old age home? Like it seems to me, some of these things have got to be really like a human rights issue, are they not?
You're absolutely right in saying that these are extremely serious issues, extremely serious complaints, and that's why we are getting assurances from the ministry that they're in the midst of fixing it. Now, in this economic climate, you've got X number of institutions built. How are you going to manage the issue? What can I as Ombudsman contribute in addition to what's happening right now? And that's a question that I ask myself all the time with the current resources.
How many complaints from Elgin Middlesex Detention Center inmates have you had?
From April 1st to August 23rd, 139 complaints. Fiscal year 2011-2012, 209. The prior fiscal year, 105. So a 50% increase in complaints from inmates.
Current or past inmates?
Current.
What is, Mr. Marin, that 50% jump? I suppose the numbers mean what they mean when you get down and drill down to them, but generally speaking, what does that tell you?
Well, not all these complaints are about overcrowding. Some of it is about illegal use of force. So that would fall into the current investigation. Right. So right now, the correctional investigation is one that we're involved in very deeply. It's a big case we're doing.
This is the use of force.
Yeah. So we're going to complete that one. We're going to monitor the situation about overcrowding. When we've completed the use of force one, we'll consider getting involved in the other one.
Okay. It would make sense to me that.
And what's the timing of that when do you have use of force time?
I'd say probably a draft in a few months.
It would make sense to me that that wouldn't necessarily indicate that jailhouse violence or problems have increased by that amount, but rather that your efforts to make the public aware of the work you do, that these inmates have awoken to the reality that they have you as an advocate.
Yes, but
Would that be-
our office has always been very, very aggressive with inmate complaints. I mean, one of the things that we've done since 2005 is streamline how we deal with inmate complaints so that the ministry has an internal mechanism to deal with them, because in the old days, you know, prisoner wanted a haircut before going to jail, call the Ombudsman.
Oh.
Yeah, we used to get so many of those things. My lunch was cold, call the Ombudsman. So we used to have like 15 people dedicated to you know, dealing with this kind of inmate complaint, and it was just swamping our office. So what we did is we met with officials from the Ministry of Correctional Services saying we are not, you know, a 911 first line of contact. So you have to set up your internal mechanisms, which they've done. So this has allowed us to focus on the more serious complaint and be able to put our resources on other issues.
What is the worst? You know, no names or anything. The worst inmate complaint that you have heard in your time in Ontario as an officer?
Well, would be to have suffered serious injury as a result of an intervention by a correctional officer, and to have no paper trail whatsoever of how that person suffered that injury.
How serious?
Broken bones.
How did you feel following the whole Orange affair, being in a position where, and if it had been some other ministry, if it had been, how did you feel dealing with that? I mean, we were all frustrated citizens, but in your role, what reaction did you feel personally?
You issued a special report.
Yeah, you issued a special report. So, but have you encountered that level?
Yeah, we mentioned in our report that, you know, had we had oversight of Orange, which we didn't have at the time,
right,
we might have been able to do something. You know, these things often happen and they mushroom into bigger scandals. And here was an organization that went rogue. And we were helpless in this situation. The more important part about Orange is right now before the Legislative Assembly there's a bill to increase oversight of Orange. But we continue to be excluded from that role. Now, you have to wonder, can you think of an organization that needs oversight more than Orange? And management at Orange continue to oppose oversight, and we remain powerless to help out people within the organization. And to me, it's flabbergasting to see. It seems to me, as an organization that wants to heal, that wants to build public trust, we are the independent officer of Parliament that oversees maladministration in Ontario. Why would you want to fight oversight? And so to me, that's not an encouraging sign.